Just a little more, my sweet girl, Zenobia whispered to the empty kitchen, her voice a chilling contrast to the predatory grin I saw through the crack in the door. I stood frozen in the hallway, my vision sharp and terrifying, watching my mother slip the crushed poison into my glass. She wasn't a saint. She was a jailer, and the eye tonic was my cage. I backed away into the shadows, my heart turning to stone as I sought the only honesty left in this house of mirrors. I sat down in the fading light, my hands finding the cool, familiar wood. The Steinway piano felt like an old friend that never learned how to lie. Under the fading amber glow of a Connecticut sunset, I sat in the music room of the Hargrove estate, my fingers tracing the familiar ivory keys. For 10 years, this was my entire world, a kingdom of texture and vibration where sight was a forgotten language. I played a minor chord, let the resonance hum through my chest, and remembered my father's voice. He used to say that true sight isn't about what the eyes capture, but what the soul refuses to forget. I believed him. I lived by it. Even as the darkness became my constant companion, I held on to the integrity he instilled in me, refusing to let the bitterness of my condition tarnish the music he loved. But tonight, the silence in the house felt different. It was heavy, like the air before a summer storm. Somewhere beneath the melodies, a secret was pulsing. 6 months ago, with the silent, unwavering support of Evander, the only man who looked at me and saw a person instead of a tragedy, I underwent a risky cellular ocular procedure in Switzerland. My family thought I was away at a sensory retreat. In reality, I was fighting for a miracle. I wanted to come home and surprise my mother, Zenobia. I wanted to see her smile again, to witness the joy of a woman who had spent a decade being my eyes. I wanted us to be whole. The bandages came off in the suffocating solitude of my en-suite bathroom. My breath hitched as the blurred, gray world suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly sharp, high-definition reality. Colors bled into existence. The deep emerald of the wallpaper, the cold white of the marble. I stood there trembling, my eyes stinging from the sheer brilliance of a world I thought I'd lost forever. I didn't reach for my cane. I didn't need it. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I stepped into the hallway. I wanted to find her. I wanted to tell her, "Mother, I can see you." I moved like a ghost, my footsteps silent on the plush Persian rugs. As I approached the kitchen's mahogany door, I saw a sliver of light spilling through a narrow gap. I stopped. My hand hovered over the handle, ready to push it open and change our lives. But then, I saw her. Zenobia was standing at the counter, her back to me, the saintly mother who had been my rock. I watched as she picked up a silver spoon and meticulously began crushing a series of white pills into a glass of blueberry smoothie. My morning eye tonic. The air left my lungs. My vision, so recently restored, felt like it was betraying me. I watched her hand, steady, practiced, stir the white powder until it vanished into the dark liquid. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't guilty. She was precise. This wasn't a mistake. It was a ritual. In that single frozen moment, a decade of accidental setbacks and unfortunate medical complications flashed before my eyes. Under the laws of this state, and under the laws of nature, what I was witnessing was a violation of every sacred bond a parent holds. It was a slow, calculated erasure. The floorboard didn't creak, but my soul did. I retreated into the shadows of my room just as the door began to swing open. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the darkness I had learned to navigate so well. But now, the darkness was a choice. I heard the familiar click of her heels. Zenobia entered, the scent of her expensive perfume preceding her like a warning. She didn't turn on the light. She never did. She assumed I didn't need it. "Aster, darling, you look so tired," she said, her voice dripping with the artificial honey of a caregiver. She crossed the room and pressed the cold glass into my hand. "Drink up, my sweet girl. It's the only thing keeping your nerves calm. You know how the doctors worry about your overstimulation." I looked up. For the first time in 10 years, I looked at her. I didn't see the grieving widow or the devoted mother. I saw a stranger wearing a mask I had helped her polish. My fingers tightened around the glass. I realized then that the hardest part of seeing the truth is pretending you are still in the dark. I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw the poison in her face and demand to know why, but I didn't. I stayed still. I utilized the same discipline I used at the piano to keep my breathing rhythmic and my expression vacant. "Thank you, Mother," I whispered. My own voice sounded strange to me, sharper, more grounded. "You're so good to me," she cooed, her hand moving to stroke my hair. Her touch, which used to be my only comfort, now felt like a serpent's coil. I leaned toward the nightstand, pretending to fumble for my coaster and used the movement to tilt the glass just enough to spill a significant portion into the soil of the large potted fern beside my bed. Zenobia helped me steady the glass, her eyes, so cold and calculating, never leaving my face. She watched me swallow the remaining drop, a look of profound satisfaction settling over her features. I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes to hide the fire burning in them. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself to move on, but boundaries are the requirements for survival. I was no longer the sheltered daughter she could manipulate. I was a witness. Zenobia leaned down, kissing my forehead with lips that felt like ice. "Tomorrow is a big day for our family's future, Aster," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "I need you to be very, very still. Just trust Mother. I've taken care of everything." She walked to the door, her silhouette framed by the hallway light for a brief second before she pulled it shut, leaving me in the shadows. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, watching the silhouettes of the trees dance in the wind, knowing that by morning, the woman I called Mother would try to sign my life away. The morning sun felt like a lie, but the evening shadows of Greenwich were honest. They hid the predators just well enough for them to feel safe. By 7:30 p.m., the grand dining hall of the Hargrove mansion was bathed in the flickering light of a crystal chandelier, its facets cutting the air like diamonds. I stood at the threshold, my fingers lightly brushing the velvet wallpaper. I wasn't just walking into a room, I was entering a theater of the absurd. I adjusted my dark glasses, a barrier between my newfound vision and their practiced deception. Every clink of heavy silver cutlery against fine china sounded like a hammer on a nail. The scent of expensive roast lamb and rosemary filled the air, a fragrance that used to mean comfort, but now smelled like a distraction. I moved with deliberate hesitation, my hand hovering in the air as if searching for a support that wasn't there. Have you ever had to act like you were drowning just to see who would let you sink? I felt the heavy gaze of the room on me. Zenobia approached, her footsteps rhythmic and soft, the sound of a woman who never wanted to be heard unless she was being praised. She placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of maternal care that had once been my only anchor. Now it felt like a predator gauging the weight of its prey. "Aster, darling, you look so frail tonight," Zenobia whispered, her voice a choreographed sigh. She guided me toward my seat, her grip just a fraction too tight. "I've had the kitchen prepare your favorite smoothie. You need your strength for the big day tomorrow." I sat down, my mind mapping the table with a precision that would have terrified them. To my left, I could hear the rustle of silk. Iolanthe, my eldest sister, whose presence always felt like a cold draft. Across from me sat Lazarus, his breathing heavy and self-important. I ran my fingers over the edge of the table, feeling the cold mahogany. A home without truth is just a gilded cage, and I have spent too long praising the bars. I didn't reach for the glass she set before me. Not yet. I waited for the opportune moment, the tension reaching its peak. Zenobia busily explained the legal necessity of reinforcing my father's trust to protect me. Iolanthe chimed in with a feignedly sympathetic remark about how difficult it must be for me to manage a checkbook, let alone an entire empire. My chest burned, but I maintained a statuesque expression. I reached for my napkin, deliberately letting it slip from my lap onto the floor. "Oh, how clumsy of me," I murmured. As I leaned down, my hand moved with the practiced speed of the pianist I once was. In the darkness beneath the table, I swapped the smoothie Zenobia had just given me with the identical bottle Evander had smuggled to me earlier that afternoon. When I straightened up, the poison was tucked away, and a harmless blend of fruit and vitamins sat in its place. I took a sip, letting them watch the liquid disappear. They shared a look, a silent, triumphant exchange that I caught perfectly through the side of my glasses. They thought the sedation had begun, That's where the trap truly opened. The conversation turned to my future, a word they used like a death sentence. As Zenobia leaned forward to tell me how much she sacrifices every day for my well-being, my eyes drifted to the sideboard. A large, polished silver serving tray sat there, tilted at a perfect angle to reflect the entire room. In that curved, distorted mirror, the truth became cinematic. I saw Iolanthe reach out across the linen. Her fingers, adorned with a fresh manicure, slid toward my hand. With a practiced, silent motion, she slipped a rare heirloom diamond ring, my father's last gift to me, right off my finger. She assumed I wouldn't feel the loss of its weight because I was medicated. At the same time, Lazarus leaned toward Zenobia. He didn't speak. He simply slid a thick legal document across the table under the cover of a breadbasket. I recognized the layout immediately. A durable power of attorney. A specific Connecticut statutory form that would give them total control over my life and my father's assets. Lazarus tapped a pen against the paper, nodding toward me. He was urging Zenobia to forge my signature right there while I sat inches away, presumably drifting into a drug-induced stupor. A surge of pity hit me, sharper than the anger. Those who steal from the blind only prove how deeply they themselves are lost in the dark. They weren't just thieves. They were ghosts, haunting a life they didn't earn. I watched them in the silver reflection, the way their eyes darted, the way their smiles didn't reach their ears. I noted the exact moment the pen touched the paper. Under Connecticut law, this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a felony. It was the evidence I needed for a legal counterstrike that would leave them with nothing but the shadows they worshipped. Zenobia leaned in closer, her face inches from mine. "You've always been so quiet, Aster," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I've given up so much of my own life to be your eyes. I hope you know what a sacrifice that is." I turned my head toward her, my gaze fixed on a point just past her ear to maintain the illusion. "Mother," I said, my voice steady and cryptic, "I've realized that the greatest sacrifice isn't giving things up. It's choosing to see things as they really are." I saw her flinch in the reflection. For a brief second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. But she quickly laughed it off, dismissing my words as the ramblings of a tired mind. She didn't understand. She couldn't. Justice is a dish best served with evidence, not anger, and I had all the evidence I needed. I didn't snatch my ring back. I didn't scream about the document. I simply sat there, the polite, blind daughter, while I mentally cataloged the theft and the fraud. I thought of Evander, my anchor in this sea of vipers. He was out there, working the legal angles, waiting for my signal. Knowing I wasn't alone gave me a strength that no pill could ever suppress. I made a silent vow to my father's memory. I would restore his honor, and I would do it with the same integrity he taught me. I wasn't just surviving this dinner, I was documenting the end of their reign. As the plates were cleared, a heavy silence fell over the room. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed secrets. Lazarus leaned back, his eyes fixed on the legal folder tucked under his arm. He whispered something to Zenobia, a low guttural sound that my restored hearing caught perfectly. "She's getting more compliant," he said. "The dose is working. Let's finish the transfer tonight before the lawyer gets back." Zenobia nodded, her face illuminated by the dying candlelight. The clock on the mantel ticked, each second feeling like a heartbeat. I felt the cold weight of the accident they were planning, the map I had seen in my father's study earlier. They were moving faster than I anticipated. The wolves were no longer circling. They were closing in for the kill. I stood up, pretending to stumble, letting Zenobia guide me back to my room. That dinner was the moment I truly stopped being a victim. I returned to my room, the longing for the stolen ring on my finger heavier than the jewel itself. I had played the lamb, but sitting in the darkness, waiting for the house to fall silent, I knew that lamb had fangs. The lion's den awaited. My father's forbidden study was the only place left with the final pieces of the puzzle. I didn't know what I would find behind those locked doors, but I knew I wouldn't stop until the truth was all there was. The darkness of the mansion at 2 a.m. wasn't empty. It was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken lies. I glided through the corridors of the Hargrove estate, my feet finding their way across the Persian rugs with a predator's grace. I didn't need the mahogany cane that leaned against my nightstand like a discarded prop. Moonlight filtered through the high arched windows, casting silver bars across the floor, a fitting image for the cage I was finally breaking out of. I reached the double doors of my father's private study, the wood cool and unresponsive under my fingertips. I bypassed the digital keypad, my fingers dancing over the buttons to a code I had memorized by the distinct clicks of the keys years ago. The door clicked open with a whisper of shifting air. Stepping inside felt like entering a sanctuary that had been preserved in ice. The scent of old leather, pipe tobacco, and cedarwood hit me, a sensory tidal wave of the man who had been my only true shield. I sat in his high-backed leather chair, the grain of the desk rough under my palms. I thought of the way he used to look at me, telling me that a person's true wealth isn't held in a vault, but in the integrity of the name they leave behind. Zenobia had spent the last 8 years dragging that name through the mud of her own greed. I began my search, not with the frantic movements of a thief, but with the cold focus of a daughter reclaiming her history. I knew Zenobia never bothered to search this room thoroughly. She viewed my father's blind daughter as a harmless ornament, incapable of navigating a world of ink and paper. My fingers found the hidden latch beneath the antique desk, a small, spring-loaded compartment he'd shown me when I was just a child. Inside lay his original medical journals and a series of cryptic letters, untouched and untampered by the vipers currently sleeping down the hall. The first page I turned felt like a shard of glass in my heart. I found a private autopsy report, one commissioned by the family's longtime physician who had mysteriously retired to the coast right after the funeral. 8 years ago, my father's heart medication had been systematically replaced. The records showed a steady introduction of a high-yield stimulant, something that would induce a natural-looking stroke in a man of his age. My knuckles turned white against the mahogany. Forgiveness is a gift for those who make mistakes, but justice is the only language the wicked understand. Zenobia didn't just inherit this empire. She paved her way to the throne with blood. I didn't cry. The time for tears had died in the kitchen when I watched her crush those pills into my smoothie. Instead, I pulled out the miniature scanner Evander had provided, the tiny blue light flickering as it digitized the evidence of a murder. I felt a surge of pride in my father's foresight. He had kept these records as a failsafe, perhaps knowing even then that the woman he shared his bed with was a stranger. I thought of the staff he'd cared for, the lives he'd built, and I knew my fight wasn't just for my bank account. It was for his honor. Then I dug deeper into the estate management folder Lazarus had been so eager to hide during dinner. Tucked behind a series of complex tax filings was a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy in my name. Zenobia was listed as the sole primary beneficiary. There was no contingent beneficiary, a strategic legal omission that effectively put a bounty on my head. But it was the handwritten map tucked into the back that stopped my breath. It was a schedule, a detailed plan for a failed brake incident on the steep curves of the Greenwich coast, planned for next Tuesday. The realization was a cold slap. The accident was timed perfectly for the week after I was expected to sign the trust waiver. A mother's love is supposed to be the world's only unconditional truth, but in this house, it was just a price tag on my life. I looked at the policy's lack of a backup beneficiary, a greedy oversight that I knew would be a fatal flaw in her defense under Connecticut's Slayer Rule statutes. They were so confident in my blindness that they had left the blueprint of my execution in plain sight. I felt a sudden chill, unrelated to the late autumn air. A floorboard in the hallway creaked, the sound echoing in the heavy silence of the office. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the frosted glass of the double doors, a distorted figure emerged. It was Zenobia. I could see the silhouette of a cup in her hand. Another kind of tonic. Another kind of anesthetic to keep her poor Aster silent. The brass handle began to turn with a slow, painful creak. That was the moment I ceased to be her daughter and became her judge. I held my breath, the digital evidence of her treason clutched in my hand like a weapon. The woman at the door was no longer my mother. She was my executioner, and she had come to finish the work she had begun with my father. I didn't know if I could escape that room, but I knew that if I did, the silence of Hargrove Manor would finally end. The silence of the Hargrove mansion didn't follow me to the Greenwich Luxury Hotel. Instead, it was replaced by a cacophony of wealth and hollow adoration. I sat in the back of the limousine, my eyes fixed on the city lights that blurred past the tinted glass. Zenobia sat beside me, adjusting her silk gloves with the rhythmic precision of a soldier preparing for a siege. She didn't speak, but her energy was electric, a vibration of pure, predatory ambition. I held my breath, the digitized evidence of her treason clutched in my mental vault like a weapon. The woman at the door earlier was no longer my mother. She was a stranger in a familiar mask. We stepped out into a blizzard of flashbulbs. The scent of expensive lilies and floor wax hit me, a sensory cocktail of high society charity galas. Zenobia gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my skin as she guided me toward the grand ballroom. I played the part of the delicate, broken doll, my gaze fixed on a point just above the horizon. I was dressed in a stunning, fragile white gown that felt more like a shroud than a celebration. As we entered the room, I realized that tonight, I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the primary exhibit. Zenobia stood before the elite crowd of Connecticut's finest, her face a masterclass in performative grief. She began her speech, her voice trembling at just the right frequencies to solicit maximum pity. She spoke of her poor, brave Aster, a daughter trapped in a world of perpetual shadows. I stood perfectly still on the stage, the heat of the spotlights prickling my skin. Being seen is not the same as being understood. Sometimes, the best way to watch a wolf is to let it think you are the lamb. I watched the crowd with hidden clarity, seeing the way they nodded with rehearsed sympathy, their checkbooks already open. Even as she used my tragedy to fill the coffers of her foundation, I felt a quiet, steady resolve. My father always told me that the tallest trees must weather the strongest winds with silent roots. I wasn't just surviving this humiliation. I was transforming it. I thought of the genuine charities I would fund once I reclaimed my name. Places where the money wouldn't be diverted to cover Lazarus's failed offshore gambles. This wasn't just an auction of my dignity. It was the final setup for their public fall. The high-stakes nature of the night reached its peak when the donation counter hit $5 million. Through the glare of the stage lights, I saw Zenobia at the back of the room. She was raising a glass of vintage wine in a triumphant toast to Lazarus and Iolanthe. They were laughing, their eyes glinting with the kind of greed that doesn't care who it destroys. They believed they were celebrating a victory. In reality, they were documenting their own crimes. I mentally logged every donor, every promise Zenobia made, knowing that under IRS regulations for 501(c)(3) organizations, this public fraud was the final nail in her coffin. Iolanthe approached me on stage, ostensibly to fix a stray lock of my hair for the cameras. She leaned in, her breath smelling of expensive gin and malice. "You look so useless up here, Aster," she whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the angelic smile she wore for the photographers. "Just keep standing still. It's the only thing you're good at." I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply stood there, an anchor in a room full of drifting ghosts. I understood then that my family had already decided they no longer needed to remember the person I actually was. A wealthy donor approached me later to offer condolences, his voice thick with the condescension people often reserve for the disabled. "I can't imagine what it's like for you," he said. I looked toward him, my resonant voice cutting through the noise. "Thank you. Sometimes the things we cannot see are the only things that truly matter." I saw him pause, the double edge of my words leaving him pensive. It was a small victory, but it felt like a declaration. I wasn't just a prop, I was a witness. I caught a glimpse of Evander in the crowd, his presence a silent anchor of hope. He gave me a subtle nod, the signal that the equipment was ready and the digital strike was in place. Seeing him reminded me that I wasn't alone in this hangman's house. True power isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one who knows when the music is about to stop. I watched my family continue their celebration, unaware that the air around them was already thinning. As the gala ended, the ballroom began to empty, leaving the scent of wilted lilies and cold champagne. Zenobia leaned in and whispered into my ear, her voice a chilling promise. That went perfectly, Aster. Tomorrow we sign the final papers at the estate, and then you can finally rest. I felt the cold weight of the accident she was referring to, the failed brakes, the sharp curve on the coast. She was promising me a grave, but I was already planning a resurrection. I let her lead me to the waiting limousine, feeling the weight of the cameras on my back like a physical burden. The night air was crisp, a reminder that winter was coming for the Hargrove family. I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but the silence of the mansion was finally over. I had seen the devils in the silver tray, and I had heard the wolves in the ballroom. Tomorrow, the world would see them too. The cold night air of Greenwich felt like a physical weight against my chest as I stood by the side entrance of the estate. I was waiting for Evander, my only anchor in this rising tide of vipers. Every shadow in the gardens seemed to stretch toward me, whispering of the accident planned for Tuesday. I checked my watch, midnight. He was late. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered by the rhythmic pulsing of blue and red lights reflecting off the white stone pillars. My heart hammered against my ribs. I retreated behind a heavy oak, watching in visceral horror as 2 police cruisers pulled into the gravel drive. Zenobia stood on the front porch, her silk robe draped around her like a queen's mantle. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a masterclass in performative distress. I watched as the officers led Evander out of his car in handcuffs. He looked toward my window, his face a mask of pale defiance. I felt the air leave my lungs. Through the open French doors, I caught the sharp, triumphant whisper of Iolanthe to Lazarus. The planted evidence worked perfectly. The restraining order is already filed. He won't be anywhere near that courtroom tomorrow. Despair tried to swallow me whole, but I fought it back. When the world tries to take your light, you must become the fire that burns in the dark. I stood there, trembling, not from fear, but from a new, jagged resolve. They had taken my only protector, thinking it would leave me defenseless. They didn't realize that by removing my anchor, they had simply set me adrift, and I was moving straight for them. I wouldn't break down, I would accelerate. That's where the quiet rebellion truly began. I moved back into that house, my footsteps silent ghosts on the hardwood. I reached my bedroom just as Zenobia's heels clicked in the hallway. I barely had time to slide into bed and adjust my dark glasses before she entered. The scent of her expensive lavender perfume filled the room, now smelling like a funeral wreath. She was carrying a glass, her voice a sinister lullaby that made my skin crawl. "Aster, darling, I've brought you something special tonight," she cooed. She sat on the edge of my bed, her presence a suffocating pressure. "The doctor said you need a double dose to ensure you sleep through the stress of the hearing tomorrow. I want to watch you swallow every drop, just to be sure my sweet girl is safe." This was it, the high-stakes moment of no return. I looked up at the blurred shape of her face, my restored sight catching the cold glint in her eyes. I had to use every ounce of my pianist's dexterity. As I reached for the glass, I faked a sudden mild seizure, my body jerking, my hand accidentally striking the nightstand. Zenobia gasped, reaching out to steady me, her attention diverted for a split second. In that blur of movement, I executed the piano switch, swapping my glass with the identical one she had momentarily set down to grab a napkin. I straightened up, breathing heavily, and brought the harmless liquid to my lips. I watched her watch me. A parent's betrayal is a wound that never fully closes, but it is also the scar that makes you unbreakable. I swallowed the water, feeling the coldness of her smile as she took the empty glass back. She believed she had just signed my death warrant. I lay back, closing my eyes, letting her think the sedation was already pulling me under. I didn't hate her in that moment. I simply saw her as a broken thing that needed to be stopped. "Good night, my angel," she whispered, her voice a chilling promise of a permanent sleep. The door clicked shut, and I waited. I counted to 1,000, listening to the house settle into its nightly rhythm of lies. Once I was sure Zenobia had gone to gloat with Lazarus in the dining hall, I sat up. The final dose I hadn't taken was the only thing standing between me and a permanent silence. I moved with a frantic, adrenaline-fueled energy. I retrieved my hidden smartphone and the micro-camera equipment Evander had smuggled in weeks ago. I crept into the hallway, my heart drumming against my ribs. Zenobia's phone was charging on the console table, unlocked, as she always felt safe in her own fortress. My fingers flew over the screen. I gained access to her cloud storage, finding the encrypted folders labeled Project Restoration. It was all there. The offshore account numbers, the wire transfer receipts to Lazarus's failing investments, and the digital draft of the accident map. I successfully transferred every file to Evander's firm's emergency server. I paused by the family portrait in the foyer, my eyes lingering on a photo of my mother from 20 years ago. She looked so different then, softer, before the greed had hollowed her out. "I don't do this to destroy you, Mother," I whispered into the cold air. "I do this so you can finally stop destroying us." It was a moment of deep, aching compassion for the woman she used to be, before I hardened my heart for the final battle. I knew that by morning, nothing would ever be the same. Suddenly, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed from the stairs. Lazarus. I barely made it back into my room and under the covers before the handle turned. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette a dark, imposing blot against the hallway light. He was carrying a thick legal folder and a black pen. His voice was a rasp of cold iron that cut through the silence. "Wake up, Aster," he said through the wood. "It's time to sign away the burden of your father's name. We're doing this now, while you're still compliant." I gripped the small camera hidden in my palm, my heart hammering so hard I feared he could hear it. The air in the room felt like it was being sucked out. They weren't waiting for the courthouse anymore. They were finishing it here, in the dark. I took a deep breath, focusing on the weight of my father's ring on my finger. The wolves were at the door, but the lamb was no longer afraid. The sunrise over Greenwich didn't bring the usual promise of a new day. It brought the cold, clinical light of a final reckoning. At 5 a.m., my room was a tomb of shadows, vibrating with the suppressed energy of a house built on bone. I sat perfectly still in bed, my father's ring a heavy anchor on my finger. The air was thin, charged with the kind of high-stakes pressure that usually precedes a disaster. I took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the digital trap I had set. The wolves were no longer circling. They were inside the room, and I was finally ready to show them that the lamb had learned how to bite. The door handle turned with an agonizingly slow creak. Lazarus entered first, his silhouette a dark blot against the gray dawn. Zenobia followed, her face a mask of practiced tragedy. They moved with the confidence of people who believe their prey was still sedated and broken. Lazarus dropped a thick legal folder onto my lap, the sound a dull thud that echoed in the silence. He didn't ask, he demanded. He held a black pen and an ink pad, his voice a low, guttural rasp that cut through my feigned sleep. "Aster, it's time," Lazarus said, his tone devoid of any familial warmth. "We need your fingerprint and a signature on the voluntary trust transfer. The hearing starts in 3 hours. Let's make this easy for everyone." I maintained my blind gaze, staring at a point 6 inches above his head. I kept my breathing shallow, my body limp, playing the part of the drugged, compliant daughter they had spent a decade creating. In the presence of monsters, silence isn't a sign of weakness. It's the quiet before justice. I watched them through the side of my eyes, noting the frantic greed in Zenobia's eyes. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the folder as if it were a life raft for her drowning empire. "Just do it, darling," Zenobia whispered, her lips cold as she brushed a stray hair from my face. "Once this is over, you can finally go to that private sanitarium we found. You'll have around-the-clock care. You won't have to worry about anything anymore." The humiliation intensified when Iolanthe strolled into the room, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She walked over to my piano, running a finger along the keys with a look of pure disdain. "Poor Aster," she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "A soulless ornament in a house of gold. I'm going to enjoy spending your inheritance on things you'll never even get to see." You were always Dad's favorite, but look at you now, trapped in a world of nothing. I felt the fire rising in my gut, a white-hot surge of intellectual superiority. I needed to delay. I needed the livestream to reach its peak audience. I intentionally faked a moment of clumsiness, my hand twitching as I reached for the pen. I knocked over the glass of water on my nightstand, the liquid spilling over Lazarus's expensive leather shoes. He cursed under his breath, stepping back to wipe the water away. Those precious seconds were all I needed. While Lazarus was distracted, my fingers moved with the speed of a concert pianist. I subtly reached for the pendant on my heirloom necklace, the third eye. With a single, imperceptible click, I activated the 4K micro camera. The internal chip vibrated once against my skin, confirming that the feed was live. It was linked directly to one of the most prominent true crime journalists in the country. The digital execution had begun. 500,000 viewers were now standing in my bedroom, watching the predators in high definition. "Don't be difficult, Aster," Zenobia said, her patience finally snapping. Her voice lost its honeyed layer, revealing the iron beneath. "You've been dead to this world for 10 years. You don't need $50 million. You need a room with a view you can't even see. Let us handle the money so we don't have to deal with your presence anymore. You've always been a burden." I ensured my necklace was angled perfectly. The camera captured the forged signatures Lazarus was already holding, documents that claimed I had signed my rights away months ago. This was a direct, irrefutable violation of Connecticut's financial abuse statutes. I sat there, the blind girl, while I broadcasted her confession to the world. The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs a witness who refuses to blink. Lazarus grabbed my hand, pressing my thumb into the ink pad. I let him. I didn't fight. I knew that the ink on that paper was worthless compared to the pixels currently flooding the internet. I thought of my father's legacy, realizing that I was finally fulfilling his last wish for integrity. I wasn't just surviving an ambush, I was conducting an orchestra of justice. "There," Lazarus said, satisfied. He snapped the folder shut. "Now, get her ready for the sedan. The judge won't wait." The mask of submission remained firmly in place as Zenobia leaned down to kiss my forehead. Her lips felt like ice against my skin. "See you at the courthouse, darling. We'll tell everyone how much we love you." I responded softly, my voice a rhythmic whisper that held a weight they couldn't understand. "I know exactly how much you love me, Mother. I've finally seen it all." She flinched for a second, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she dismissed it. She believed her victory was absolute. As the family left to prepare, leaving me alone with the chauffeur, I quickly checked the small tablet hidden inside my pillowcase. The stream had hit 700,000 viewers. The comments were a wildfire of outrage. The world was finally awake, and the monsters were walking straight into the light. A black sedan pulled up to the gravel drive, the sound of the engine a low hum like a funeral dirge. I sat in the back of the limousine, the darkened windows reflecting a woman the world still thought was a victim. As we pulled out of the estate and toward the Stamford courthouse, I watched Zenobia in the front seat. She was adjusting her grieving mother veil in the rearview mirror, checking her reflection for any sign of a flaw. I sat in silence, feeling the powerful vibrations of the road beneath the wheels. My vision remained clear, and my heart was calm. I didn't know exactly what chaos was about to erupt, but I knew that the silence of Hargrove Manor was over. Justice was coming, Mother, and you were the one who could never have foreseen it. The limousine tires hummed against the asphalt, a steady, monotonous sound that grounded me as we approached the Stamford courthouse. Zenobia sat opposite me, her face partially obscured by a delicate black lace veil. She looked like the picture of a grieving saint, her hands folded neatly over a designer clutch. I sat in my curated silence, watching her through the darkness of my glasses. I wondered if she felt the net tightening or if she truly believed her own lies. The Connecticut Superior Court was a fortress of wood and cold marble. As we entered, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the low murmur of the press. Zenobia gripped my arm, leading me through the hallway with a theatrical tenderness that made my stomach churn. I caught the arrogant smirks of Iolanthe and Lazarus in the gallery. They looked like they had already spent the $50 million. Zenobia's lawyer stood up, his voice booming with a hollow authority as he presented the certified medical reports. He argued that for my own safety, total guardianship was the only humane option. I sat at the witness stand, a stoic statue in a gown of fragile white, reflecting on the fact that the truth is a slow-burning candle. It doesn't need to roar to incinerate the lies that surround it. Just as the judge leaned forward, his pen hovering over the final order, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Evander walked in, his suit slightly rumpled but his eyes burning with an unshakable fire. He had been freed on bail just an hour ago. He held a silver briefcase aloft, presenting a court order for an emergency evidence submission. I saw Zenobia's hand tremble. The legal tide was turning, and the wolves finally realized the lamb was no longer alone. The atmosphere in the room shifted from formal to electric. I stood up slowly, the silence in the room becoming absolute. I reached for my dark glasses. This was the moment I had lived in the shadows for 10 years to reach. I removed them with a steady hand, my eyes clear and piercing as I looked directly into Zenobia's soul. She gasped, her face draining of color, the lace veil fluttering as she physically recoiled. "I was blind to your heart, Mother," I spoke, my voice resonant and calm. "But my eyes have been open to your actions for a very long time." Evander didn't waste a second. He plugged the drive into the court's multimedia system. The giant LED screens on the walls flickered to life, displaying the high-definition footage from my necklace camera. The gallery erupted in a collective gasp. There was Zenobia, leaning over the kitchen counter, meticulously crushing white pills into my morning smoothie. There was Iolanthe, sliding the diamond ring off my finger with a sneer. And there was Lazarus, whispering about the failed break incident that would ensure I never reached my 30th birthday. The evidence was irrefutable, a digital map of a decade-long betrayal. The judge's face turned into a mask of righteous indignation. He didn't wait for a closing argument. He immediately ordered the freezing of all Hargrove assets and issued an arrest warrant for Zenobia, Lazarus, and Iolanthe on charges of attempted murder, financial fraud, and criminal conspiracy. As the bailiffs approached the petitioner's table, the saintly mother finally shattered. Zenobia began to wail, a shrill, desperate sound that lacked any of the grace she had cultivated. I watched them being led away in handcuffs. I didn't feel a surge of hatred. I felt a profound, quiet liberation. "I don't hate you," I said to Zenobia as she passed the witness stand, my voice steady and filled with a strange kind of pity. "I just refuse to let you hurt anyone else." Justice isn't about the volume of the scream. It's about the weight of the truth. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright morning sun of Stamford, feeling the air on my face for the first time as a free woman. I wasn't just Astor Hargrove, the blind heiress. I was Astor Hargrove, the architect of my own salvation. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of the Hargrove estate. The air smelled of salt and late-blooming jasmine. The mansion was no longer a tomb. It was the William Hargrove Center for Integrity and Recovery. I had converted the halls of my father's house into a sanctuary for those who had been silenced by family betrayal or disabled by greed. Iolanthe and Lazarus were serving their sentences in federal prison, and Zenobia remained in a secure psychiatric facility. I ensured their basic needs were met, but I never visited. Boundaries are the highest form of self-love, and silence is the best response to a soul that refuses to change. I sat by the Steinway piano, the setting sun illuminating my father's ring. The sun's rays transformed the coastline into a vibrant tapestry of fire and serenity. Light not only shows us the world, it shows us ourselves when the world cannot see. Evander came to me on the terrace, his presence a quiet, enduring source of comfort. We talked about the future of the foundation, about the lives we were helping to rebuild. I had reclaimed my father's name, transforming a legacy of betrayal into a beacon of hope for others. I played a resounding chord, the sound of absolute freedom spreading across the water. My story began in a world of calculated silence, but as I watched the sun set over the horizon, The greatest miracle wasn't that I could see, that I finally had a voice to speak the truth. To those who have ever felt erased by the people they love, remember, your light hasn't gone out. It's just waiting for you to open your eyes and embrace it.